All right, so today we're going to go over Unit 5, long-run consequences of stabilization policies. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at is the Phillips curve. Now, what the Phillips curve does is it's going to have two curves, one representing the long-run Phillips curve, and then the other one representing the short-run Phillips curve. And what it's going to be, what's going to be in the graph is inflation and unemployment. So let's look at that real quick. If you guys have a sheet of paper, go ahead and let's draw this graph out together. So on the vertical axis, you're going to have inflation, right? And then on the horizontal axis, you're going to have unemployment. And then short run, all right. So your graph should look like this. Okay. Put that over here. Okay. Horizontal axis, you'll have inflation. Vertical axis, you'll have inflation. Horizontal axis, you'll have unemployment. And that makes sense, right? As price levels increase, jobs will then, unemployment will decrease, right? Because we're at a peak. That means everybody's working, right? We have low unemployment. Inflation levels decrease. That leads to higher unemployment. Now, this curve, I believe, was started by Lafner. And I think in the 70s or 60s. So it's a relatively new curve. Although one thing that I will point out, it's important to kind of keep in mind in the back of your mind when you talk about this, but this curve right now is being highly debated as like this is an inaccurate curve or inaccurate graph. Like it's not showing that it's relative or that it's relevant anymore, right? That this doesn't really happen in reality. But it does make sense, right? I mean, it makes sense and for this class, we need to understand that this is just, this is theory-based, right? And in theory, it does make sense, right? That if we have high inflation, that's going to lead to low unemployment, right? Because we would be on the peak of the business cycle, right? And then in the trough, right, we'd have low inflation but high unemployment, right? Because price levels kind of dictate how many people are working, right? There's high price levels, right? And so, or you see kind of a strong correlation with high price levels and employment, or should see high price levels, I guess. So that's basically the curve, right? It shows a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So you can see in slides 6 and 7s kind of that correlation between both. And we can see here when the economy is overheating, right? Or in a peak, let's just say this is 5%. This is 1%. You can see 5% inflation, right? Here we are in a peak, right, or overheating economy. Here, 1% inflation, we are in a trough or slowing down, or the economy slowed down, right? And so that makes sense, right? Because lower price levels, if people are not working, they cannot afford things, right? So you have to lower price levels to attract more people or draw in more demand to bring in people to purchase your stuff, right? And then same goes with higher price levels, right? Higher price levels, you have more people making more wages, so you're purchasing more things and so on, right? All right, now, so what happens when aggregate supply falls, causing stagflation? Well, this is going to increase when we see stagflation, right? Remember that stagflation is over here, right? This is price levels, and this is real GDP, right? You have this is AS2, AS1, right? You get a shift, increasing price levels, and then decreasing unemployment. Well, how can we get that on this curve right here? Well, I want to represent higher inflation, right? Or higher price levels, right? And more unemployment. Well, you can shift the curve out, right? Showing here, or not so necessarily the long run, but showing here, right? And that's a shift. So anytime you shift aggregate supply, and you're going to shift aggregate supply to the left, that means that you're going to shift your short run Phillips curve to the right, okay? So both these graphs are going to mirror each other, right? If you shift your short aggregate supply curve to the right, you would then shift your short run Phillips curve to the left, okay? And we're going to see the here shortly, here in a second, okay? Well, we've kind of already saw it, but now, the long run Phillips curve, there is no trade-off between inflation and unemployment. It's going to be a natural curve. And why is it going to be a natural curve? Because in the long run, it's always assumed that we would be at the natural rate of unemployment. So whatever our natural rate of unemployment would be this vertical curve right here. Okay? Which is usually our natural rate of unemployment, remember, is between 4 and 6%. Okay. Okay. Now, so I talked about shifting the short run Phillips curve. Remember that a shift is mirrored of the aggregate supply curve, right? And how now we want to see like movement along the curve, right? So for movement, that's going to be a shift in aggregate demand, right? So if aggregate demand shifts to the right, you would then, again, it's mirrored, so you would see movement along the Phillips curve. So if we shift our aggregate demand curve and we're shifting that to the right, so that's an increase in our AD. Hopefully you guys can see that pretty well. There's an increase in AD, then you'll see that price levels increase, right? And unemployment decreases. So that would be point A and move to point B, okay? Okay, does that make sense to you guys? Hopefully that does make sense to you. So just real quickly, it's pretty simple, right? Aggregate supply is when you shift to aggregate supply, you're going to shift the short run Phillips curve. When you shift aggregate demand, that's going to be movement along the curve. And it makes sense, right? Like just look at this. What happens here to price levels? Price levels increase. As price levels increase, you see unemployment decrease. So you see inflation from point A to point B, right? And then you see unemployment decrease as well, okay? So hopefully that is pretty clear for you guys. Now, if we shift it in the opposite direction, so now let's shift aggregate demand to the left. If we shift aggregate demand to the left, then we will have movement along the curve, and we'd have movement along the curve to the right, okay? So that would be point B, and that's pretty simple, right? Because price levels have gone down. From point A to point B, you have deflation, right? So price levels go down, and then you have greater unemployment, right? So we have greater unemployment here at this point right here at Y sub 1, okay? And you guys can see that pretty clear on slide number 14, or slide 13, 14 is where I'm at on our PowerPoint. Okay. Again, when you are shifting the short run Phillips curve, or I'm sorry, shifting the AS curve or the aggregate supply curve, you're just mirroring the Phillips curve. Okay. Okay, and so that's going to be the Phillips curve. Okay, so a lot of times when in the past when AP has asked questions about the Phillips curve, they'll include the Phillips curve along with, and it'll be in an FRQ, but they'll include the Phillips curve along with maybe like an ADAS model, and so it'll be like part of the question. Now you can see some examples on slide 24. And they've asked a few, like, you know, multiple choice questions on the Phillips curve, but you can see on slide 24, that's an example of a FRQ that's from AP, and so, or from College Board, and you can, if you want to practice that one, go ahead and feel free to practice that one. If you have any questions on it, just let me know and I'll go over it with you guys. But since we're a little short on time, I want to make sure that we cover the rest of the topics. So that was 5.2. Let's go ahead and open up 5.3. Okay. 5.3 is going to be money growth and inflation. Okay. Now, we've kind of already covered this topic, and it's very similar to some stuff that we've already kind of covered, but the quantitative theory of money, or the Chicago equation, is what it's commonly called, or both. I mean, it came from Chicago. I think Chicago State is the university that some economists, I think, or it's Chicago University or Chicago State University, whatever. Doesn't matter. But what's important is the quantity theory of money and how that works. Okay, so if a train can carry a maximum of 200 passengers, how can it transport 1,200 passengers a day? Well, let's think about that. If a train's only able to hold 200 people, right? Then how can it move 1,200 passengers? Well, it's pretty simple, right? It goes on its route 6 times, right? So if we're here in El Paso and there's a train from the east side to the west side, right, or wherever, right, El Paso to Las Cruces, it can make that trip 6 times, moving 200 different passengers each time, and that equates to 1,200 people taking the trip, right? So let's think about that as money, right? Is that there's a certain amount of money in circulation, right? When that's whatever amount the Federal Reserve has in circulation, right? And we look at this graph right here, right? So this is the money supply graph. This is the money demanded curve, right? Wanting to get money. Okay. So we see this, whatever this curve is, right? Whatever value X, or whatever value, whatever value X is, that's the money that's in circulation, right? So, you know, that's obviously not what our GDP is, right? It's not, you know, whatever 17 trillion or whatever our GDP, 13 trillion, whatever our GDP is at. It's not that amount, right? It's obviously going to be a smaller number, but because of the multiplying effects, right, you get what's called the velocity of money, right? So like, and it's very similar to the multiplier effect, right? But just think about this, right? Like, I have $100. I call Ryan, say, hey, Ryan, you know what? I need my electricity in my light fixed, the electricity in the light in front of my garage. I need that fixed. I'll pay you $100, right? Come over, fix it. So I've just spent that $100. That's goes towards GDP, right? Clearly. But then that $100, Ryan's going to take it, and then he's going to go take out Fernie and Tim and all his buddies, and you're going to take them out to lunch, right? So they're going to take them to McDonald's, right, or Whataburger, and that $100 gets spent twice, right? So that's the average times $1 is spent and respent in a year, right? So that's referred to as the velocity of money. So if the GDP is 400 billion, then the amount of money in the economy is only 100 billion, right? Then what is the velocity of money in that economy? Well, to get to 400 billion, that 100 billion that's in the economy needs to get spent 4 times. So the velocity of that 100 billion is 4, right? And that makes sense, or it should make sense, right? Now, the equation, or the quantity theory of money equation, is M times V equals P times Y. Okay. Now, there's some cool things about this equation that we can kind of point out here real quick. So let's just kind of go through what the different things are. So this is money supply right here. Okay. And this might be something that could be used in an AP question, right? Like they might give you the money supply curve, or the theory of money, the quantity theory of money, right? And then you're supposed to set up a graph with that. And then from there, you could even manipulate that graph as well. So something that could be thrown on this test, right? But so this is the money supply curve, right? That's this curve right here, okay? Okay, and then this is inflation, and then this, of course, is quantity of money. Just lower that there. There you go. Okay, and then this is velocity. So this is how many times this value gets spent, right? And that's going to equal price level, and this is going to equal output. Well, let's think about that. What's this side of the equation, right? Well, price level times output is what? Is GDP, right? So again, that's prices of everything, right? Times the output, the stuff that we're making, right? That's nominal GDP. So pretty cool. This equation should equal out, right? And that makes sense because this is the money that's in circulation. This is the times it's getting spent. And then this is the GDP for the nominal GDP for that year, right? Price levels plus output, or times output, right? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I think it does. Now, what happens in the long run when the central bank increases the money supply? So in the short run, spending eventually leads to higher resource prices and inflation, right? If inflation is bad enough, banks then don't lend and the economy tanks, right? So if this is true, why do so many economists support expansionary monetary policy? So monetary policy can increase real output in the short run, right? And so do you guys have any questions about the quantity theory of money? No questions? Pretty simple concept, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? Both sides equal each other. You have money in circulation. How many times that money gets spent equals the price level of things that are being spent in society, right? All right. All right. So let's go ahead, and so that was 5.3. And let's do 5.4. I think we'll finish off at 5.4 and then call it a day for today. And then, yeah. Okay, so. All right, 5.4 is going to be government deficits and the national debt. Okay, so just a few definitions for this deficit spending, right? Deficit spending is when the government is spending or borrowing in the future, right? So it's a trade-off of increasing government spending without raising taxes to close the recessionary gap. And that's what's happening right now, right? With the stimulus package that just got passed. That's a good example of deficit spending. We didn't raise taxes to offset the cost of this, right? So what we did is what's called deficit spending. Now, just some terms that we need to go over is budget deficit. That's when the annual government spending and transfer payments are greater than tax revenue. Okay, so that means that the government, right, they bring in from taxes, right? Um, if that is less than what they're spending, then you're going to have a budget deficit for that year. Okay. Now, a budget surplus is the exact opposite. When the government is not spending as much money, right, but they're bringing in a lot more revenue, you're going to have a budget surplus. Now, the national debt is an accumulation of all the budget deficits over time. So you can go and see what the national debt is. It just probably increased quite a bit with this stimulus package as it got passed, but and there's calculators that show you how it's moving at, and it's moving at a very aggressive speed throughout the day. You can see how it grows. But I think it's at 24 trillion. I'm not too sure. But something to keep an eye on just with the national debt is, and we're going to see how this is going to, the next PowerPoint, we'll see how this impacts this class particularly. Okay. Yeah, if you go to slide 9, you can use the US debit clock, right? Or you could just, you just Google US debitclock.org, and it'll show you the exact amount of what the US deficit debt is, right? A lot of other cool statistics that are on there that you guys can see, like how much is in student loans that people are taking out, how much the households in the United States, how much credit card debt they carry on average, stuff like that. So pretty cool stuff to look at. So kind of check that out. Okay. Also, you can see over time, right, that the national debt, specifically from World War II, has increased, and in the last 20 years or so, has exponentially increased. And with and both Republican and Democrats have gone into the national, or increased the national debt. So it's not one party or the other party that's against or for increasing the national debt. And so that's, just that sets us up for our next topic. Our next topic, of course, is going to be crowding out, and what happens when the government comes in and starts to take out loans from other or from private institutions. Okay, and what happens to the economy based off that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording here.